All right, SEC breakdown, giving you some instant analysis. And what do we say about this one, Chad? Chad Neepling and Mark Rogers following this Arkansas thriller over TCU in double overtime at TCU, 41-38. Chad, I just knocked out some analysis that'll be posted to our channel, so I'm going to let you just cut loose on this one. What did he see out of the Hogs? Because what I saw early on for about 3+ quarters was a team that was controlling the defensive line. The defensive line looked amazing, harassing Kenny Hill all over the rushing attack. And when there were some plays made in space, the tackling was great in space for Arkansas. And then they really didn't expand on the lead and kept TCU in the game. And Kenny Hill start to hit a hot hand.
Yeah, this game, Mark, I think we were talking about it before it started, was kind of going back and looking at Bielema, Patterson versus one another, going back to 2010, Rose Bowl. I know that's been brought up a little bit this week. It had a lot of that feel to it because you knew Bielema has a certain type of play. He has an identity to his teams regardless of who the personnel is. There's a specific way he's going to play the game. And same with Patterson. He has a way he's going to do things. And so this was, you knew what you were going to get. It was just all about the playmakers at this point. So looking at this game, coming into it, you had the tradition of the Southwestern Conference, at one point that was together. These two teams have been playing each other, had played each other from 1920 to 1991. So there's a huge history between these two teams. And, the last time they played, it was 21-20 when Crow was the head coach at Arkansas. So it's kind of this is there's so much history behind it. And since then, Arkansas had 7 head coaches and TCU's only had 3, and one of those being Gary Patterson. So, a lot of history. And even though they went their separate ways, they came back tonight. And, you just felt like that Southwest rivalry. It came back. And so, it was a physical matchup. I agree with you. I think the defensive front, Dietrich Wise, Ledbetter, Jeremiah Ledbetter had a heck of a game. At one point when he chased Kenny Hill down, it was a 26, I believe, or so, when he took off for a sprint. And you see this guy literally loop around the line of scrimmage, make his way back. He probably ran 30 yards and caught up with him to make the play with Andre Tolliver to make that tackle. But the biggest thing to me that stuck out, and I just finished an article about it, was the fact that the secondary, like you said, they were able to make plays in space. They made physical hits, whereas before, the secondary, say Ramirez and Tolliver and some of these guys that are playing in the secondary, had you got a guy got open like that, you would have maybe seen a soft arm tackle or somebody trying to grab at them, and whiffing or jumping at them and whiffing. And, you didn't see that tonight. You actually saw guys lowering their shoulders, getting low, getting into form tackle positions. And that was something you just didn't see. And two things that come to mind. We knew that Turbin was going to be a heck of an athlete for TCU coming into this game. You knew it was a guy that you had between him and Kenny Hill, make Kenny Hill go elsewhere. Don't look at this guy. And Turbin still made some big-time plays. But that being said, 2 of the bigger plays that he made, in fact, one that he cut up the seam of the defense for about 50 yards or so, Josh Liddell comes in and makes the tackle on the 5-yard line. In years past, that would have been a touchdown. And so I think the addition of Paul Rhodes, former Iowa State head coach, Big 12 roots, Reggie Mitchell, the running backs coach, Big 12 roots from Kansas, having those type of guys on your staff and that insight, I think, played dividends. But also the fact that this team overall, the athletes are better on the defensive side, I think, but also you've got some seasoned guys, Ramirez, Tolliver, those guys are all now, upperclassmen, Dietrich Wise, who's a senior. Several guys that are on that defensive front. McTelvin Agim had a big play as a freshman, had a few big plays as a freshman, a 280-plus pound kid that's 18 years old, and they're making big plays. Austin Capps had some big plays, another freshman. So they were able to break things up, and I like the fact that Rob Smith has the depth on the defensive front, you were talking about, that you saw where you would have 4 down linemen, but 1 would drop back, and 3 would pressure. And so you had the ability to kind of move and shake with a guy like Randy Ramsey, who's a very athletic guy that they moved from linebacker to end. And so those things were really apparent to me tonight. And I really feel like the defense, if they can keep going in this direction, Mark, we can really see an Arkansas team that, traditionally we all talk about how good they are in November. if they can progress this way, that by the time they get to November, this should be a shutout type caliber defense. And so that's going to be the scary part for the rest of everybody else in the SEC.
All right, folks, you've joined SEC Breakdown, so this is what we do. We size up the matchups, we talk about the issues on and off the field, and we break down the games once completed. And this is a fun one to break down, 41-38 Hogs. Austin Brooks Ellis. I was going to go to Allen, but let's stay on the defensive side with Brooks Ellis. I counted 3 plays that he made behind the line of scrimmage, chasing down jet sweeps, swing passes, catching fast running backs on the edge. And then, of course, he had the big interception that made it 13-0.
Yeah, that was beautiful. You saw the pressure coming from up front. At first, you didn't see that, but Hill starts to roll out to the right, and then you see the defensive linemen coming at him, and they're making pressure on him. And at that time, when he makes the throw, he actually throws it behind his wide receiver, which gave enough time for Ellis, who was in pursuit, to be able to make the read and take a beat on the ball and then run it back. Ellis was fighting cramps tonight and still went to the locker room, got an IV, came out, and still led in tackles on the team tonight. Led with 13 tackles, which is awesome. Got the interception. I tweeted something out. I said, Ellis was on fire tonight. I said, he's done it all. I was like, you got 13 tackles, an IV, and an interception. That's the kind of night, that you want to brag about when you get older. So, this guy was from sideline to sideline. And here's the thing, defensively, when Rob Smith and Bielema don't decide to use him to rush the quarterback and put him in blitz packages and allow him to roam free there in the middle, that's when Arkansas is at its most dangerous as a defensive unit, because they can really shut you down. He has the ability to be fast, and he has the ability to get cut off, but he's very physical at the point of attack. He's very good at the rush team, at the defense too. But last year, you saw a lot of times where defensively they would rush him to help in the rush defense when they went up against SEC teams, and that left them wide open over the middle. And you saw that a little bit tonight whenever he would rush in and different packages, and they didn't bring him back into the flats out there into the middle, the second level, and they would burn you over post play or whatever it may be, because you didn't have that defender there. When he's in the middle and he's able to roam, Mark, you can tell, and you were just talking about it, you can see how big of an impact he has on this defensive unit. And I thought tonight he had a phenomenal game. For a guy who's having a senior campaign, who's looking at possibly being an NFL candidate at some point, man, he's really having a big-time season so far.
Switching to the offense, Chad, what really impressed me is that if you just look at the stat sheet, Kenny Hill completely outshines Austin Allen. But more's on his back in terms of the offense. But if you look at Austin Allen, what's impressive is for 3+ quarters, it's an Arkansas kind of game. The defensive line's dominating. They're pitching a shutout at 13-0. A little bit later, it's still 20-7. He's handing the ball off to Raleigh Williams, and he's making the play action passes when he needs to. Suddenly, all of a sudden, he's in a barn burner, and he's got to flip the switch and become a guy that's zinging it down the field and matching Kenny Hill point for point, and he was able to do that. Yeah,
and here's the thing. He didn't lose his demeanor. If you're watching him out there on the field, he stayed cool, calm, and collected. There's so much debate coming into this season, Mark, about comparison with Brandon Allen, and so many people within the state were doubting Austin's ability because he hadn't shown up yet. And he had a year under Enos, and Dan Enos, in my opinion, is like the quarterback whisperer. For whatever reason, he just knows, being a former Big Ten, all Big Ten quarterback himself, and being a head coach, he knows those type of guys are invaluable in the locker room. We've talked about that before. And having a guy like that can actually work with you an entire offseason before your season even begins. You have him for a year, like Austin did, to learn from. And being in the room with his brother, he's picked up on so many different things. But, he's really, in my opinion, the last 2 games, you look at Louisiana Tech in the fourth quarter, where they converted 2 4th downs in that game on that game-winning drive so that they could beat Louisiana Tech, and then they ultimately got the sack, and then they were able to run out the clock. He matured in that drive, in my opinion. And then you turn around, you look at tonight, and he took another big step forward versus a ranked team. Being able to take the ball and just run it in, towards the end zone. Granted, he got the push from big old 72 in his back to get him across the defense, get him across the line. But that being said, like you're talking about, just being able to sling the ball. And not only that, his deep passes were crisp and clean, and his spirals were so tight. And here's the thing with that. I don't think that you could have really, looked at Brandon Allen last year in the same light as far as those deep passes just being, they are on the money. You talk about the one in the very beginning of the game where Drew Morgan caught the pass, but eventually it was, a play happened, and then they reviewed it and they said, no, we're going to take that back. That personally, I felt like they got robbed. No bias involved. Just felt like that was a robbed play, because how can you go back and review it after a play? But that throw was spot on, and it was on a rope. And so I think there's a difference between the two, and I think Austin Allen is forging his own identity early on, a lot sooner than Brandon Allen did in his first couple of years. But I feel like Austin is really definitely going to be taking the reins. He's the guy that, personally, if it's me, I'm really looking at him consistently. You look at him 17 to 29, 223 yards, 3 passing touchdowns. Kenny Hill, for all the yardage that he had through the year, 377, he only had 1 passing touchdown. And so a model of consistency Austin is at most times. And so I feel like with with the targets that he has with Morgan and Sprinkle and those guys, they really help him spread the field a lot with that play action. And man, the deep passes to Sprinkle, there was nothing TCU could do about that tonight. And so that was pretty impressive, especially when you got a guy like Morgan that you can throw it to, Mark. When you've got a guy like that you can toss it to, and he's going to fight for extra yardage, or Keon Hatcher who's going to fight for more yardage, that makes a big difference. And so I think that this team, what he showed tonight and what he's been able to do fighting through this adversity, with the offensive line having new guys, not exactly getting what you want out of the run game consistently, getting pressure, not getting blocks where you need them to at times, because there are young guys that are still learning on the offensive side of the ball. I feel like with Austin, just putting it bluntly, he's played gutsy. He's played with a lot of moxie. And for me, I think the team is taking on that personality. And if they take on that type of personality, they're going to be tough to fight. They're going to be tough to play this season, if they have that personality throughout.
Looks like we've got a couple handfuls of people watching us here. So if you love the SEC, you go over to and do a search on YouTube, SEC Breakdown Channel. You'll find it right at the top. Subscribe to us right there. And obviously, if you found me here on Mark Rogers TV, I talk college football across the board. You can't appreciate those throws until you're on the sideline and know that when he's throwing from one hash all the way across the field on an out pattern, that is a serious NFL quarterback's throw. And I saw Austin Allen make several of those. Chad, Raleigh Williams is a guy that we all have to root for. Knocked out of the game against Auburn last year due to a neck injury, and he's just right back at him, running as hard as anybody you're going to find.
Yeah, getting to watch him in the scrimmages this fall, Mark, was pretty phenomenal, especially the first full scrimmage where they got to take on full contact with the ones-on-ones, and actually getting to see him take his first hit, man, it was awesome to be able to see there, be on the sideline and watch that and see him do it. And it was like he hadn't skipped a beat. Matter of fact, he looked stronger. He looked faster to me. He's definitely bulked up, during that period of time. He's gotten bigger. His legs are definitely a lot thicker than they were last year, that's for sure. So he's gotten a lot bigger from the waist down, and you can tell when he takes a snap off the ball and the ball's handed off to him, he's got low pad level. He's very he's going to try to churn out for more yardage. He's the type of guy that's going to try to carry defenders with him. The thing that I was disappointed in tonight was between the tackles, between the center and the tackles, a lot of the running that we had seen in the past with Bielema over the last couple of years with Alex Collins and Jonathan Williams, I didn't see a lot of that. And at times when the tackles between the guard situations, that's when Raleigh would be able to bounce it out because he saw some vision. He's able to get out and make some cuts. He made some really nice runs tonight, some long runs. He's a phenomenal kid, man, great kid up front. Dad's a police officer there in Dallas, so he's a good kid. When you talk to him, super smart, just humble as he can be. He knows that what he went through this last year was big adversity for him, and what had actually happened was a disc had literally got pushed out between his vertebrae, and it had to go in and surgically put all that back together. And so he was, at one point, Bielema talked about the fact that at one point when he walked over to him last year at the Auburn game, and, Raleigh looked up at him and said, "Coach, I can't feel my arms." And that just really kind of went through him and went through the entire program. So for him to be in the situation he's in right now is phenomenal. I mean, he had 137 yards, which was great last year. Last week he didn't finish with quite 100. Having dual 1,000-yard runners this year isn't looking too good for Arkansas, to be quite honest with you. At the rate they're going, it's predominantly, it looks like it's going to be low scoring because we're going to have such big, the defense is going to be such a big factor. But the running just isn't where you want it to be. Cody Walker had 7 for 19. Dominique Reed had 2 for 18, and the freshman the freshman out of Texas, Devwah Whaley, that was so highly touted, the 4-star coming in, had 2 carries for 5 yards. A lot of people were wondering where he's at, and I think Bielema was kind of waiting to unveil him, so to speak, to everybody, because he is a very fast, very physical player. I watched him in the first scrimmage, and he lit some secondary guys up, and so he's not. It's not for a lack of playmaking. I will tell you that Devwah isn't in the game. I don't know exactly what the reasoning is. I know in conference, and speaking with Bielema and asking questions about it, he has said that he just doesn't want to mentally set him back because he's so young. But he did it with Alex and a couple other guys. He's run them at young ages, and he's put other guys in there at freshmen. So hopefully against Texas State this next week, we'll get to see him a little bit more and get out there and get some runs. I'd like to see it. I know a lot of the fans would too. But Raleigh's holding it down. He's doing a phenomenal job considering what he went through as far as the surgery and all the, the rehab he had to go through this offseason.
And Chad, what a gutsy call on the 2-point conversion, because most coaches would say, I'm going to go with something conventional here, roll out my quarterback, give him the run pass option, or we're a running team, we should be able to push it in from 2.5 yards. But you're trusting a lot of guys to exchange the football flawlessly on a double reverse. And then Keon Hatcher, even though it wasn't the prettiest pass you'll ever see, he threw that ball right where he needed to, right on the sideline for Austin Allen to pull that thing in, and the game's on the line.
Yeah, it was phenomenal to see that. And that's one of those moments where you're just kind of, if you're there or, you're at home, wherever it is, you just kind of, you remember that moment, that you saw that. That's just one of the great things about college football. So I really enjoyed it, and I loved the play to actually get the win for Austin. He gets his number called. It's the exact same running play that Brandon ran against Ole Miss last year, and so that was really kind of interesting to see all that unfold. And again, I think the sky's the limit for Austin at this point. And he does have speed, he does have athleticism that Brandon doesn't, and that's what makes him unique in another aspect. And so Keon, I'm not shocked he's been able to. The thing is now is they have so many playmakers on the outside. They're trying to figure out how to get them used in the games. And so why not let him throw? I guess maybe this will be his next recruiting bit for Bielema. Hey, if you're a wide receiver, come to Arkansas. We'll make you a star, kind of like he did with Trey Tola here about a year ago on the offensive lineman. So maybe that's what's next. But it was a phenomenal. It's phenomenal. I'm really ecstatic for Austin Allen. I think he's going to be one of the guys we're talking about towards the end of the year in the SEC.
We talked about this before we came on. When is the last time this program beat a ranked team out of conference? Here's my guess. I've mulled it over in my head a little bit, Chad, because it's definitely not during the Brad Bielema era, because they played 2 unranked opponents in the bowl games, Kansas State and Texas. Played Rutgers and some other teams that were definitely not ranked, Texas Tech, in the last few years. I'm going to say it goes back to Bobby Petrino's team that won the Cotton Bowl over Kansas State. That's going to be my guess, and I may do a little research tonight a little bit later on. So,
well, you'd have to be right, because you think the year after that they played Ohio State in the Sugar Bowl, right? They lost that game.
And it all fell apart.
Yeah, and then from there it was motorcycles and blondes and hot tamales. So, I won't go too far into that. But I was making jokes about that last night, Mark. Where were you? I was making jokes when Louisville was playing last night. You
got to bring it every week, Chad. No, you do. This guy does. And anybody watching this, and we'll get this out to a lot of people, If you love the SEC, you got to join us on SEC Breakdown, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, the whole deal. Chad's one of the key guys, definitely, when it comes to Arkansas, but really the entire conference. We've got it nailed down with a number of contributors. So it's good stuff, Chad. Appreciate it, and love the breakdown, man.
All right, brother. We'll do it again. We've got a show coming up this week, so it'll be fun.